Hi everyone, Ted Wyman here with another edition of Jet Setting, this time to wrap up the Winnipeg Jets season, 2021 56-game regular season, followed by 8 playoff games, which is very unique in the fact that the Jets swept the Edmonton Oilers out of the playoffs and then were swept themselves by the Montreal Canadiens. I'm joined today by Sun hockey writer Scott Billeck. And Scott, you have obviously examined this quite thoroughly. Looked at the analytics, looked at the overall Winnipeg Jets progression. I think going back a few years even to when they were in the Western Conference Final in 2018. And I don't think you really love what you see. And tell me a little bit about your thoughts on where you think this team is right now.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of issue, I suppose, if that's what you want to call it, with how things have happened, actually stems from January 1st, roughly 2019, when the Jets went from the first place team in the Central Division and ended up falling kind of out of grace all the way down to the playoffs. They get into the playoffs kind of on this kind of downward spiral, get into the first round against the St. Louis Blues, lose the first two, win the next two, and then drop the next two. And in game 6 of that series, it was a bit reminiscent of how the Jets played game 4 against the Montreal Canadiens. A pretty lackluster effort. Just didn't seem like it was all there for them. Yes, the Jets ran into a red-hot Blues team that went on to win the Cup that year. But this was the season, 2018-19, where the Jets were touted, I suppose, to go further than they did the year before, which was the Western Conference Final, and kind of make that next push in their development. They had all the same players for the most part that year, save for Paul Stastny. But that whole core, that they had all that experience from there. It obviously didn't work out that year. Everybody knows they lost in the first round. That offseason comes, they lose half their defense. Dustin Byfuglien doesn't come back. And then it just, it kind of gets stagnant there. Nobody really replaces those guys. The trade for Trouba gets made. Pionk is the return. We don't know at that point that Neil Pionk is going to turn into the defenseman that he's become. And they obviously draft Ville Heinola as well, who obviously shows glimmers of hope in that next training camp. But again, at the time, and so Ville Heinola hasn't played a huge role in this team since then. And the analytics, essentially suggest the Jets are one of the worst possession teams, one of the very worst expected goals teams. And it shows that they've largely been bailed out by Connor Hellebuyck throughout the last 2.5 seasons. You look at last season, 2019-20 season, Connor Hellebuyck wins the Vezina. There's a game during that season he makes 51 saves in a 3-2 win. If you look at this past season, again, a lot of the same, sort of things. Connor Hellebuyck playing a massive role in the Jets' success. So yeah, it's kind of this. It's arguable. I know some people don't think it is or as bad as it seems, and that might be true. It's never as bad as it seems. I suppose. There's been this steady kind of downward descent. And we talk about this core here and all that stuff. The problem is there's just not enough supplementing that core at the moment, in my opinion. And so this core is, a very good group of players. Nikolai Ehlers, Mark Scheifele, Adam Lowry, Josh Morrissey, Connor Hellebuyck. You have one of the world's best goalies at the moment. And then the defense in front of them is just not good enough, to kind of make that push. There's not enough depth up front if you lose a guy like Mark Scheifele to kind of, help deal with that for a season or a short period of time, I should say. So yeah, it just seems like, the Jets are kind of at the crossroads right now. What propels them forward? Do they have the coach that can do that? Is the GM making the right moves to extract what he can out of this core before this core begins to get older and older and essentially less and less effective, less out of their prime, that sort of thing. So it's a very interesting offseason that the Jets are heading into. And I think some tough questions need to be asked. I mean, Paul Maurice is in the 7.5 season. There's been here for 7.5 seasons now. Kevin Cheveldayoff 10. He obviously, on Cheveldayoff's case, he took over a team that needed a massive overhaul in terms of prospects and players and all that. There's been a lot of drafting, developing. I'm not sure there's been a lot of supplementing on top of that at times to get this team to where it needs to be.
Right.
And then questions about Paul Maurice. Has he taken this team as far as it can go? Can he take it further? Is he a victim of the parts on this team not being adequate enough? I mean, I think that is also a legitimate question to ask. But at the same time, this is a results-orientated business. And if you don't win, oftentimes you get moved aside and somebody else is brought in to assume those controls to try and get a better result.
Yeah, a lot of other organizations, Scott, would have made a change by this point. I mean, that's just the truth. We've seen that many, many times at the GM level, at the coach level. Even Nikolai Ehlers said yesterday his entire 6-year career, he's had the same coach, and that really is rare in hockey. It's not something that people expect to have. It's not something he's had when he played in Europe. And then you get into a situation here where Winnipeg has, by design, had that same coach for a long time, and part of it is that Paul Maurice is such a good citizen for Winnipeg. He's to those of us in the media, there's no doubt that he's a terrifically accommodating person, and a great wit, and a very good person to talk to about the game of hockey. Does he show it on the ice though? That is debatable, and I think heading into this postseason, after the Jets lost 7 games in a row and 9 of 10 down the stretch at the most critical time of the season, I certainly said the Jets will have to take a look at both of those guys, at Cheveldayoff and Maurice, if they say get swept out of the playoffs. Now, I meant the first round, and had they been swept out of the playoffs by Edmonton, I think we would absolutely be having those questions. But I wonder if Paul Maurice, if the Jets winning that first round against Edmonton, and I think he did a very good coaching job in that series, although Hellebuck was such a huge factor. But does that round buy him some more time here in Winnipeg? Does it buy both of them more time here in Winnipeg? I think there's a pretty good debate going on, maybe for the first time in the era of the new Jets, about whether or not that direction should be continued, or if it's time to really head in another way.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because I write my column, Fraser writes his, and there is some truth. I mean, the Jets made the top 8 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, you can't discount that fact. I think what you have to look at too, though, I mean, there's teams that make the Stanley Cup playoffs at times that fire their coaches in the next year, right? Because they just haven't got them over the hump. I look at Barry Trotz right now, who's headed to the basically the conference finals this year, with the Islanders team that's now won 5 playoff series since he won the Cup with the Washington Capitals. And the Capitals have not won a series since they won the Cup and Barry Trotz left. I'm not saying that Paul Maurice hasn't done a good job with the players or whatever. I believe some of the words that the players say in terms of, they like playing for the coach. He hasn't lost a room. I do believe that. I don't believe that Paul Maurice ever lost a room here. You can see that in the way that they play for him. I mean, players that that have tuned out the coach don't play it the way that the Jets do. They wouldn't have gone through the first round and played that kind of style against the Oilers, if Maurice lost the room. I think the questions are legitimate. I mean, I think people have to turn aside the fact that Maurice is good for the city, all that stuff. There's a lot of coaches out there that are good for the city. What is the best for the team? What does the team need to do to continue moving towards the end goal, which should be winning the Stanley Cup, right? That's what every team plays for. Teams make changes. If you look at Vegas, I mean, they fired Jared Gallant when they're a good team still. But I guess they felt that Jared Gallant just wasn't getting them to the point. They've moved the deal. Now they have Pete DeBoer, and they're again now one game away from the conference final. Again, pushing with that team. I mean, some teams are quicker than others, to kind of pull this trigger, to trying to keep things going. But I mean, look at a team like the Maple Leafs. They fired Babcock, who's, regardless of how he may treat his players, is considered, one of the better coaches, right? He's, coached Olympic teams and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you just have to move on and make a change, because the change is going to produce a net good at some point. And this isn't to say that, it's not an attack on Paul Maurice as a human or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with Paul Maurice, the human. I'm just not sure that he's extracted everything from this team that he can. But the counter argument to that too is, here he took a team last year that was, basically cobbled together with, guys from the waiver wire, and put them into playoff contention by the end of the year. And then obviously they get into playoffs. Same thing this year. I mean, the team's still not optimal. Cheveldayoff doesn't go out at the trade deadline and get what the team needed, which was a top 4 defenseman. At least that was the kind of the notion at the time. And they still get into the playoffs and get out of the first round. My only argument to that is, if you don't have Connor Hellebuck in that net, are the Jets even close to the playoffs no matter what? Yeah, I mean, it's a debate. It is one of the big debates right now in this city. I'm sure it's one of the debates within the team, maybe not as much as as we make it out to be in the media. But yeah, it's certainly a huge debate outside of it, social media, the papers, whatever you're reading. People are talking about whether or not Paul Maurice is fit to continue with this team, or even Kevin Cheveldayoff at times as well. So it's just,
it comes to mind to me that during times when you might be looking at replacing your coach, sometimes it depends who else is out there. If at some point you say, we're going to stay with this guy, but somehow Barry Trotz was available, you may have made a mistake then. But you have to look at your situation as it is now and say, well, where are we in terms of who might possibly come in and replace these guys, and how could they possibly do a better job? You do have to evaluate that. Certainly if you're Mark Chipman, he is obviously a loyal guy. That's become a real trend in Winnipeg. The Blue Bombers have had Mike O'Shea for a long time. Winnipeg Jets have had Paul Maurice for a long time. I think people like that in a lot of ways, but certainly, you don't want to let it get out of control. And one thing I just want to touch on very quickly before I let you go, Scott, Pierre-Luc Dubois, this season did not work out well for him. I was pretty impressed with how he got up on Zoom on Wednesday and kind of owned it. He didn't try to hide behind an injury. He didn't try to hide behind anything. He just said, I am not where I want to be. And, it's really on him to come back next year and be where he wants to be, because this was kind of a lost season for him.
Agreed. And this is one thing I said early on about Pierre-Luc Dubois, is that you're not going to see what Pierre-Luc Dubois can do until, he has a full training camp with this team. I mean, I think that's a huge thing. I mean, I have empathy for Pierre-Luc Dubois. He went through a lot this season. I think people still need to realize the fact that quarantine, injury, new team, not fitting in right away. He said the pressure didn't get to him and that sort of thing. That might be true or not, but he was trying to fill some pretty big shoes that left this town. And people were looking for that scoring, and especially in the playoffs, and it just wasn't there. People were looking for that dominant power forward that helped beat the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Toronto Maple Leafs when he was a member of the Columbus Blue Jackets. That wasn't there. So I get the frustration by fans, of course. But I think there needs to be a bit of patience afforded to a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's 22, who needs some time to, just acclimate a little bit different, in a normal season. Just allow him to acclimate and then make your judgments next year. If it's the same next year, then maybe that there is a an argument there for something needing to happen there. But I think Dubois deserves a bit of the benefit of the doubt here. We know he's had some pretty good seasons in Columbus before coming here. It didn't come together for him here. Let him have a training camp. Let him find that maybe hopefully some stability on this team, which hasn't always been the case. But just let him to kind of get into the flow of things, reset over this summer, reflect on the year, and see how he comes back. I mean, this is a big test for Pierre-Luc Dubois. It's arguably his first down. Well, it's his first kind of not good. It's his first bad season as an NHL player. So see how he responds to that. How does he come back? What does he do in the summer to do that? I think those questions still have time to be answered next season. So, I have time for Pierre-Luc Dubois. I know the organization does as well. And I think, at the end of the day, I think if he comes back next year and is the player that he was prior to coming here, or even better, I think that the narrative will quickly shift on Pierre-Luc Dubois.
The great news for the Jets organization is that he does not need a new contract this summer. That would be a very difficult situation.
That would be a difficult one, yeah.
If you had to make that decision right now. But anyway, Scott, thanks always for your insight on all of this. We will continue to talk Winnipeg Jets throughout the offseason and into a new season in not too long a time, only a few months away. So that's one of the beauties of a late NHL start and a Jets run into the playoffs. For Post Media, I'm Ted Wyman. He's Scott Billeck, and you've been watching Jet Setting.